I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Lila, my wife of 5 years, was sitting on another guy's lap in the hot tub, and neither of them had a shirt on. Their expressions made it obvious that they were involved in something intimate. Furious, I quickly recorded a short video on my phone. For a second, I thought about changing into my swim trunks and confronting them, but I decided not to. Instead, I sat in the room trying to figure out why she hadn't wanted me at the party in the first place. Lila had been working as a secretary for SG Funds, a hedge fund firm, for about a year, and she always seemed genuinely happy in her role. Now I could see why. Earlier that week, I stumbled across a message on her phone about a company Christmas party with a +1 invite. When I brought it up, she tried to talk me out of going, saying I would just be bored listening to finance people talk about numbers. Feeling confused, I asked her if she was embarrassed to be seen with me. She quickly denied it, explaining that it wasn't about shame, but that the conversations at the party would be dull. Her company hosted these monthly parties, usually just for the employees, and that meant Lila would often stay out late, sometimes even until the next morning. I had never really made a big deal about it before, but now I was beginning to understand what really went on at these events. When she explained things, I just nodded as if I understood. Then she casually mentioned that if I decided to go, I should make sure my tuxedo was cleaned. Still, she warned me, saying she doubted I would actually enjoy myself. On the day of the party, she suggested I pack swim trunks, which made me question why I would need them for a Christmas party in December. She explained that after the main event, they usually end up at her boss's penthouse, where there's a hot tub. I took that in, and she admitted they pretty much do this after every party. Then she asked me to promise I would be on my best behavior that night. I reassured her that I always am, though I couldn't help but feel uncertain about it. My curiosity got the better of me, so I asked her why she was telling me all this now. She explained that these parties could get pretty wild, and she didn't want me to get upset if things got out of hand. She also mentioned that the guys there tend to be very friendly, sometimes overly so. I pressed her, asking if there would be any problems, but added that as long as everything passed the husband test, there wouldn't be an issue. She responded with a smile and kissed me on the cheek without saying a word. At the main party, Lila introduced me to her friend Veronica, referring to me as her husband. Veronica smiled and questioned the term husband, implying that the night was going to be fun, and calling Lila a wild and crazy girl. I was left wondering what Veronica meant by that, but Lila just smiled and giggled. She told me she needed to mingle and asked Veronica to go with her to grab something to drink, specifically requesting wine. Without even glancing back at me, they both walked off. I went to the bar, ordered the wine for her, and got a beer for myself. I scanned the crowd, but Lila had completely disappeared. I wandered around looking for her, but after half an hour of searching, there was no sign of her anywhere. Eventually, I gave up and sat down at an empty table, hoping she might come looking for me. While waiting, I watched the lively scene on the dance floor, feeling ignored as people passed by like I didn't even exist. She had been right. It wasn't any fun for me at all, and I was getting more and more annoyed that my wife had ditched me. After sitting there nursing my beer for a couple of hours, I finally decided it was time to call it a night. If Lila wasn't going to spend any time with me, I figured I might as well head home and leave her to enjoy the night with her friends. As I made my way toward the entrance, I saw Lila and Veronica coming my way, along with 3 other guys, one of whom had his arm wrapped around Lila's waist. Lila didn't bother with introductions. Instead, she greeted me in a slightly slurred voice, saying, "Oh, there you are." When she kissed me, I could taste tequila and something else on her lips. I told her I was about to leave since she had ditched me 2 hours earlier, and I asked her where she had been. Lila blushed and avoided eye contact, while the guys just smirked. I chose not to make a scene. Veronica chimed in, explaining that they had been taking some shots. Lila looked a little confused by Veronica's explanation, which made me even more curious about what had really been going on. I asked her about the shots, pointing out that I could taste tequila and something else. Lila brushed it off, saying they were heading to Jason's place because the hot tub was ready, and she asked if I was coming. I said yes, but asked if I'd actually get to spend any time with her or if she planned to abandon me again. She laughed and told me not to be ridiculous, saying I'd see her later. Then she decided to ride with Veronica and the guys, casually mentioning that it was fine if I followed them. I suggested she ride with me, but before I could say much more, one of the guys grabbed Lila's hand and pulled her away, making my irritation grow even stronger. They all left together, with Lila and Veronica trailing behind the guys, their laughter echoing as they walked off. I got in my car and followed them. When I arrived, I was puzzled to see Lila already in a bikini. By the time I made it to the hot tub area, she was sitting in the water with two of the guys, who I later found out were Jason and Marcus Jassonet, senior partners at her firm. They acted more like overgrown frat boys than professionals. While they went outside, Veronica came up to me and casually asked if I thought we could get together later that night. I shot back, asking what made her think I'd be interested, especially since I was married. She seemed surprised and said she thought Lila and I had an open marriage, considering the way Lila had been acting around the other guys, especially how she kissed me earlier. Still confused, I asked her what she meant by the way Lila had kissed me. That's when Veronica dropped the bomb. Lila had already been with Jason and Marcus Jassonet. A wave of disgust hit me, and I felt sick to my stomach. Veronica's expression shifted when she realized the shock on my face, and she blurted out, "Oh my God! You didn't know, did you?" I admitted I had no idea and then asked her how long this had been going on. Veronica revealed that this had been going on ever since Lila started working at the company over a year ago. Stunned, I tried to process what I was hearing. It hit me hard. Lila had been involved with them all this time, and I was completely in the dark. I asked if this was what had been happening at the party. Veronica confirmed it, saying Lila had been with the two guys and even a few others, apologizing because she assumed I already knew. She then tried to reassure me, saying that despite everything, Lila truly loved me. I couldn't help but respond sarcastically, saying I wasn't exactly feeling the love right now. Veronica suggested I go upstairs and change, hoping Lila would behave herself with me around. I scoffed at the idea but headed upstairs anyway. That's when I saw her with those two guys. As much as I loved her, I couldn't stomach what was happening, and I knew I had to confront her. I marched back downstairs. As soon as I reached the bottom of the stairs, Lila greeted me, asking why I wasn't in my bathing suit and if I was going to join them in the hot tub. Instead, I grabbed her by the arm, pulled her into a nearby room, and shut the door behind us. I demanded to know if she was ever planning to tell me about this so-called open marriage. I mentioned what Veronica had told me, then pulled out my phone and played the video I had taken of her with the two guys in the hot tub. I questioned her, wondering if her goal was to humiliate me even more after abandoning me at the party. Lila tried to downplay the situation, saying they were just having some fun. She even admitted to being intimate with them but claimed it didn't mean anything. Stunned, I told her I completely disagreed. It meant everything to me. I took off my wedding ring, placed it in her hand, and then took off her rings from her left hand. She looked confused and asked what I was doing. I told her how disgusted I was by her actions and that, at that moment, I hated her. Wishing her a Merry Christmas, I added that I'd be seeing a lawyer about a divorce on Monday and told her not to bother coming home. Despite her desperate pleas and claims that she still loved me, I remained unmoved. I told her I no longer cared about what she wanted, that I now knew the truth and understood why she hadn't wanted me at the party. With that, I said goodbye to Lila and left. As I was walking out, one of the guys, though I wasn't sure which one, called after me, asking why I was leaving so early and complimenting Lila. I just shrugged and told him she was theirs now. I left the penthouse, went downstairs to my car, and drove home. Lila started calling and texting me right away, but I ignored every attempt she made to contact me. Once I got home, I deleted all her messages and blocked her number. I changed out of my tux, grabbed a few trash bags, and started tossing her clothes and personal belongings into them. I loaded everything into her car, pulled it out of the garage, and removed the garage door opener. I also changed the access code so she wouldn't be able to get back in. By the time I finished, it was around 2:30 a.m., and I was exhausted. I collapsed onto the bed and immediately fell asleep. The next morning, the house phone rang, waking me up. Without thinking, I answered it with a groggy, "Yeah." It was Lila, asking me to come get her. I told her she was no longer my problem. She begged for a chance to talk, but I firmly told her that if she had anything to say, she could speak to my lawyer. I also mentioned that her car, filled with all her stuff, was sitting in my parking spot, and then I hung up. She tried calling back right away, but I disconnected the house phone. I had no desire to see her face or hear her voice again. I went back to bed and passed out, only plugging the phone back in later. When I finally woke up that afternoon and was coherent enough to check, I noticed her car was gone. Good. Maybe she finally got the message. I started researching divorce lawyers online and reading everything I could about the divorce laws in our state. It was a community property state, but since we didn't own any real estate, that part wouldn't be an issue. We didn't have children either, so there would be no child support to worry about. Lila made about as much money as I did, maybe even a little more, so I wasn't too concerned about alimony either. I also learned that while most divorces here were no fault, there were exceptions for cases involving infidelity, cruelty, or misuse of assets. Filing on those grounds would make the process more expensive and time-consuming, but honestly, I didn't care. After doing some research, I jotted down the contact information for one attorney, Rachel Stone, and decided I'd call her on Monday. While I was making notes, my cell phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered anyway, thinking it might be Lila or someone else. A woman's voice introduced herself as Veronica and informed me that Lila was staying with her for a few days. I confirmed that I was moving forward with the divorce. Veronica sounded worried about Lila, telling me she was an emotional wreck, crying in her room and on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I stayed indifferent, reminding her that Lila had brought this on herself. Veronica asked if I still had any lingering feelings for Lila. I responded honestly, expressing my current feelings of hatred and disgust. I made it clear that Lila had been unfaithful for over a year and had the audacity to humiliate me in public, which led me to conclude that our relationship was finished. Veronica insisted that Lila loved me, but I remained skeptical. I questioned her about Lila's actions after I left and how long they had all stayed at the penthouse. I asked if she had slept with Jason and Marcus Jassonet again, seeking straightforward answers. Veronica admitted that they had all gathered after I left to comfort Lila, suggesting that I could have enjoyed the evening if I had chosen to stay. I couldn't believe it and asked where people like her came from before ending the call with a curt goodbye. After hanging up, I noticed 2 text messages from unfamiliar numbers that had arrived early that morning while I was asleep. When I checked them, I found videos attached. One message read, "Missed one hell of a party. Bro." I played the video and was shocked to see Lila engaged in intimate activities with 3 men at the penthouse. While I recognized Jason and Marcus Jassonet, the third person was someone I didn't know. The unfamiliar man looked directly into the camera and said with a grin, "That's quite a wife you have there, brah. Too bad you weren't here." The second video featured more of the same, but it concluded with Jason holding my wedding ring. As Lila displayed it in her open palm, she looked into the camera with a smirk. My hatred for her intensified even further. I transferred the videos to my computer and made a copy for my lawyer. I briefly considered sending the videos to all of her friends and family but ultimately decided against it, at least for the moment. The information I found on Rachel's website indicated that I needed to be very cautious in how I responded to her actions. Any negative reaction on my part could jeopardize my case. Her site cautioned about the potential consequences, so I opted to hold off for now. I didn't hear anything from Lila or Veronica for the rest of that day or the following day, which I considered a blessing. I spent the remainder of the weekend clearing out any trace of Lila from the apartment. On Monday, I reached out to my boss, explained the situation, and took a short vacation. Understanding my emotional state, having been through a divorce with an unfaithful spouse himself, my boss empathized with what I was going through. I reached out to Rachel's office and scheduled an appointment for that afternoon. On my way to the meeting, I stopped by the bank to take steps to separate Lila from our joint account. I settled her joint credit card and then canceled it, withdrawing half of our assets to open a new account in my name. During the appointment, Rachel explained the divorce laws in our state and suggested pursuing an alienation of affection lawsuit against her employers. While I recognized the uncertain outcome given the evidence I had, I decided to leave the choice in her hands. Regarding the delivery of the legal papers, I chose to send them to her office, hoping they would feel a fraction of the public humiliation I had endured over the past year. After our meeting, I paid a retainer and headed home. On the way, I received a call from Veronica. "Hello," I answered. She suggested a meeting with Lila that afternoon, but I declined, following my attorney's advice to keep my distance. Veronica then offered to provide Lila's contact information after checking with someone. When I shared Rachel's contact details, Veronica made one last attempt to advocate for Lila. I firmly rejected any notion of forgiveness, telling her that Lila should expect divorce papers soon. I ended the call and made my way home, stopping only to grab a 12-pack of beer and a couple of packs of cigarettes. Although I had quit smoking when we first got married, I felt the urge to do something that might help keep my destructive tendencies at bay upon my arrival. Just as I settled in, the house phone rang. When I answered with a greeting, Jason Reed, my wife's employer, introduced himself. I recognized his voice from the party but noted a more professional tone this time. I acknowledged who he was and asked what he wanted. Jason mentioned that he was aware of my distress regarding the events from Friday and claimed they thought I was fine with my wife's activities at company functions. I questioned whether he knew she was married during all of this, and he admitted that he did, explaining that Lila had told them we had an open marriage and that he assumed I was okay with it. I pointed out that he never bothered to check with me about it and then inquired about the videos they sent me on Friday night. Jason stated that the videos were Lila's idea and expressed his regret for the situation. He asked if there was anything he could do to make amends, to which I responded by outlining my terms. I expressed my intention to deliver a severe kick to his groin after he testified against her in court, and I made it clear that I planned to sue him for alienation of affection. I emphasized that if he truly wanted to make amends, he needed to accept my terms without any resistance. When I asked if he had anything further to add, he inquired if I was genuinely going through with the lawsuit. I confirmed my intentions, stressing that they had violated their own moral codes over the past year while simultaneously destroying my marriage. He shrugged it off, insisting that it was all just for fun and that they never meant to harm my marriage. I questioned his expectations, incredulous that I would commend them for their actions. I suggested that perhaps he was swayed by sensational internet stories. He pleaded, proposing that we could resolve this situation amicably, expressing concern that a lawsuit could ruin their lives. I dismissed his worries, stating that it was not my concern, and ended the call. Grabbing a beer, I stepped out onto the balcony for a smoke. I didn't hear anything from them until Wednesday, when they were officially served at Lila's office. Veronica contacted me, incredulous about my actions, claiming that I hadn't given Lila a chance to explain herself and emphasizing the humiliation she was currently enduring. I remained indifferent, declaring that I had no interest in Lila's feelings after what she had done, and I instructed Veronica not to call me again before slamming the phone down. Just moments later, I received another call from a number I recognized as Jason's office. I answered, my anger flaring, and he wasted no time in insulting me, threatening to kick my ass. He accused me of ruining his life and promised to destroy mine in return. I hung up abruptly, frustration boiling inside me, and immediately called Rachel to report Jason's threat. "Good," she replied. "I will file for a temporary restraining order against Lila and her cohorts today. You'll receive a copy of the order." "That's great. But what if he comes after me?" I asked, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. "Make sure you have witnesses and do not instigate anything," she advised firmly. I understood the implications of her words. Later that afternoon, there was a knock on the door. True to her word, Rachel had filed the restraining order, and a courier was delivering my copy. I decided to take additional precautions, so I purchased a small motion-activated camera to monitor my front room. I also kept a sturdy Louisville Slugger close to the front door, just in case. If Jason or his accomplices intended to follow through on their threats, I needed a way to gather evidence and a means to protect myself. For the rest of the week, things remained relatively peaceful. Thankfully, I did not hear anything from Veronica, Lila, or her boyfriends until Saturday night. I was sitting on my balcony, nursing a beer and a cigarette, when the doorbell rang. Moments later, loud pounding echoed through my apartment. I stubbed out my cigarette and stepped into the front room, peering through the peephole in the door. Sure enough, it was Jason, and I could see someone else with him as the pounding intensified. He shouted for me to open up, accusing me of violating a restraining order. In response, I told him I was calling the police, which only provoked him further. He yelled at me to open the door. Ignoring his demands, I continued dialing emergency services. When the operator answered, I quickly explained the situation unfolding at my door. She informed me that they had received multiple calls from my area and were dispatching cruisers to my location. She advised me not to open the door until the officers arrived, and I thanked her before hanging up. The pounding persisted, and I couldn't help but wonder if Jason was going to break the door down. Clutching the bat tightly, I waited anxiously, listening for any further commotion. Peering through the peephole, I saw 2 large police officers placing cuffs on Jason and the other man who had accompanied him. One of the officers knocked on my door and identified themselves as police. I opened the door just in time to see Jason glare at me as the officer led him toward the cruiser, yelling threats in my direction. The officer then asked if I knew Jason, to which I nodded and showed him a copy of my temporary restraining order. He read through it, spoke into his radio, and informed me that they would be taking both of them downtown for the night. I explained my side of the story, and he thanked me for my cooperation, expressing confidence that Jason would not be a problem for me for a while. Once they left, I closed and locked the door, then returned to my balcony with a fresh beer in hand. The next day, the news of Jason's arrest made the papers, with the headline reading, "Hedge Fund CEO Arrested." Over the following days, more articles emerged, revealing that several clients were pulling out of SG due to the company's involvement in ruining employees' marriages, which was beginning to affect their bottom line. I couldn't help but think, good. When I returned to work that following Monday, it was challenging to focus, but I managed to get some work done. After about 3 weeks of silence, I received a call from Rachel. She greeted me warmly and asked how I was holding up. I replied that I was doing as well as could be expected. Rachel informed me that Lila had secured an attorney, and they had petitioned the court for marriage counseling. To my surprise, the judge had agreed, ordering 6 sessions starting that week. I questioned whether the court could mandate marriage counseling, and Rachel confirmed that they could. She advised me to attend, explaining that not showing up could lead to a contempt of court charge, possibly even jail time. I expressed my unwillingness to reconcile with Lila, but Rachel understood my feelings while emphasizing the importance of my presence. With great reluctance, I agreed to go. Rachel added that if the counselor found no hope for reconciliation, they would inform the judge of their assessment. Curious if there was anything else I needed to know, I asked for more details. It was then that Rachel revealed that Lila's attorney had informed her of Lila's pregnancy. I felt a wave of frustration wash over me at the thought of waiting another 8 or 9 months before any legal actions could take place. Rachel confirmed this delay, adding that if the child turned out to be mine, I would be obligated to pay child support. On a more positive note, she told me that the judge had approved a legal separation until Lila gave birth. I couldn't help but respond sarcastically to that. Rachel then provided the counselor's address, wishing me good luck as I noted the information on my calendar. I made it clear in no uncertain terms that there would be no reconciliation with the cheater. When I arrived at the counselor's office, I was promptly ushered in. A somewhat older woman, peering at me over her glasses, sat at her desk. Across from her, on a love seat, sat Lila, looking somewhat forlorn. A wave of unease washed over me. I had a very bad feeling about this. The counselor, Dr. Naomi Prescott, introduced herself and suggested that I sit next to Lila on the love seat. Instead, I opted for a smaller wooden chair positioned at a 45-degree angle to the love seat, making it clear that I had little choice in being there. Dr. Prescott acknowledged my reluctance but expressed her satisfaction with my attendance. Turning her attention to Lila, she inquired about her hopes for the sessions. Lila, with an earnestness that grated on my nerves, expressed her desire to reunite with me, emphasizing the impending baby and her wish for us to be a family again. I couldn't help but react with derision at her words. Dr. Prescott then turned to me, asking about my expectations for the sessions. I responded firmly, stating that reconciliation was off the table, nodding in Lila's direction to reinforce my point. I noticed her recoil slightly at my declaration. Dr. Prescott nodded in acknowledgement of my statement, recognizing that reconciliation for the child's sake was not a possibility in my eyes. Dr. Prescott asked if I would consider reconciliation for the child's sake. I reiterated my doubts about being the father while making it clear that I was committed to supporting the child if it turned out to be mine. However, I firmly stated that reconciliation with Lila was absolutely out of the question. When she pressed the matter again, I pulled out my phone and showed Dr. Prescott the videos that had been sent to me, hoping to convey the depth of my betrayal. After watching them, she appeared visibly disgusted. As I put my phone away, I couldn't help but question her about her own marital status. I asked how she would feel if the roles were reversed and it was her husband in those videos, emphasizing that this was a betrayal that had stretched over more than a year, and it happened right in front of her. Dr. Prescott insisted that the focus should be on the two of us and the upcoming child. I informed her that Lila had a child to consider and reiterated my doubts about being the father, expressing a strong desire for answers from Lila. After a moment of consideration, Dr. Prescott nodded, suggesting that Lila owed me those answers. Lila, looking down with embarrassment and shame painting her cheeks, finally met my gaze and agreed to provide the answers I sought. Naomi then turned to me, giving me the opportunity to speak directly to Lila. I asked Lila if she had known what was going to happen on the night of the party, and she affirmed that she did. Pressing further, I inquired if that was the real reason she had been so adamant about me not attending, and she admitted it was. Reflecting on that terrible experience, I accused her and her colleagues of planning to humiliate me, to which she reluctantly agreed. I wanted to know if their intention was to humiliate me even more at Jason's place, and she sheepishly confirmed it. I probed further, questioning the duration of her involvement with the other men at SG, and she confessed that it had been happening since she joined the company. Confused, I asked her to explain her reasoning behind such reckless behavior. She casually replied that she enjoyed it, describing it as fun, naughty, and exciting, an indulgence that made her feel desirable. When I asked how many men she had been with, excluding me, she nonchalantly mentioned around 4 or 5 dozen. My shock was palpable as I emphasized the potential risks of contracting venereal diseases. Outraged, I confronted her about whether she even knew the father of the child she was carrying, and she admitted she was uncertain. I challenged her expectation that I would raise and financially support this child, criticizing her for her actions. I expressed my complete lack of love for her anymore and voiced my strong resentment, even hoping for a negative outcome regarding the pregnancy. Lila and the others looked visibly shocked by my words, and I noticed that Lila was on the verge of tears, but my anger remained unwavering. In my attempt to inflict even more emotional pain, Dr. Naomi intervened, signaling that I had made my point. I firmly rejected the idea that I was discarding 5 good years of marriage, placing the blame squarely on Lila's infidelity. I contested the notion that our marriage had been good for 5 years, emphasizing that the last year had been anything but genuine, particularly after Lila's admission of being involved with 48 to 60 men and her uncertainty about the child's paternity. With that, Naomi concluded the session, expressing her intention to conduct individual sessions with each of us before determining the next steps. We scheduled our appointments for the following week and left. As I made my way to the parking lot, Lila called out to me, but I ignored her and headed to my car. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of her sobbing over her steering wheel, and a sense of satisfaction washed over me. It felt fitting for her to experience some emotional pain after everything. Later that night, I received an angry call from Veronica, who blamed me for Lila's state. She conveyed that Lila was in the hospital due to a mishap and accused me of mistreating her. I defended myself by asserting that I had merely spoken the truth, contrasting my honesty with Lila's actions over the past year. Veronica questioned my apparent lack of concern for Lila being in the hospital, but I responded with indifference. She labeled me a loser and emphasized that I should at least provide insurance information, reminding me that Lila was still legally my wife, and I would be responsible for her medical bills. After a moment of reflection, I decided to visit Lila in the hospital, acknowledging the information Rachel had shared earlier. Veronica provided me with the room details, and upon my arrival, I approached the nurse to give my insurance information and briefly discuss Lila's condition with the doctor. I asked about the cause of the mishap, but the doctor explained the complexities surrounding pregnancies, leaving the specific cause uncertain. Curious about the duration of the pregnancy, I learned that Lila was approximately 9 or 10 weeks along, which left open the possibility that the child could be mine. However, I considered this inconsequential, as the mishap represented an opportunity for me to move forward with the divorce. After asking the doctor about Lila's well-being and receiving assurance that she would be fine, I entered her room. She lay there, visibly distressed, tears glistening in her eyes. Veronica was positioned at the foot of the bed, and upon expressing her displeasure at my presence, I responded with a growl, causing her to retreat from the room. Turning my attention to Lila, I acknowledged the finality of our relationship. She asked if I truly hated her as much as I had claimed earlier. I admitted that, in that moment, my intensity had lessened. However, I made it clear that reconciliation was out of the question due to the breach of trust she had demonstrated. I expressed my frustration, revealing how each trip she made to the store left me wondering if she was involved with the checkout clerks. I questioned the sudden shift in her respect for me, emphasizing that I had treated her exceptionally well throughout our years together. She denied any wrongdoing on my part and recognized my role as a devoted husband and lover. Yet, I countered her point by stating that if that were truly the case, she would have resisted the advances of others. She reluctantly admitted that she had succumbed to the influence of those who claimed it was normal for husbands to witness their wives with other men. I dismissed her explanation, firmly stating that the divorce was inevitable and any attempts to salvage our relationship would be futile. In response to my decision, she tearfully accepted, agreeing to inform her lawyer the next day. I sternly clarified that any hopes of friendship between us were unrealistic. Despite her apologies, I remained resolute in my decision to end the marriage. I looked at her for a few moments. "Yeah," I said as I began to leave her room. "Goodbye, Lila." As I walked away, I could hear her crying behind me. Tough luck, I thought. Good riddance. A few days later, I received a call from Rachel. True to her promise, Lila had abandoned all objections to the divorce. Naomi wrote a report stating that reconciliation was impossible and suggested I undergo anger management. The judge concurred and made a similar recommendation. Although it wasn't a court order, Rachel managed to secure settlements from SG funds as well as from Jason and Marcus Jassinet. About a month later, she handed me the largest check I had ever seen in my life. "That's minus my fee, of course," she said with a smirk. "Certainly," I replied, feeling a mix of gratitude and relief. I deposited the check and moved on with my life, as best as I could. I often thought of SG as Sodom and Gomorrah, and approximately 6 months later, it shut its doors for good. It became clear that clients had lost trust in the company's financial integrity. I wonder why. I cynically mused to myself. After the incident at the apartment, Jason and Marcus Jassinet kept quiet. Both served a 30-day stint in county jail for their reckless behavior and seemed eager to avoid a repeat of such a fiasco. With their reputations tarnished in the community, they sought a fresh start on the West Coast. Lila and Veronica continued sharing the same apartment, transitioning into jobs at a retail store in a strip mall that specialized in women's clothing and cosmetics. I encountered them occasionally but made a point of never acknowledging their presence. Remaining single, I casually dated over the next couple of years. Eventually, I met Sophie Turner, a recent divorcee, and we embarked on a slow and easy journey of dating for a few months. Like me, she had experienced the pain of infidelity in her previous marriage. Understanding her hurt, I provided as much support as I could. In the initial weeks, our activities primarily revolved around heartfelt conversations and outings for dinner and a movie. Recognizing her vulnerability, I took the time to engage in comforting activities, such as holding hands and enjoying leisurely strolls through the park. Despite finding her attractive, I chose to let her take the lead in our blossoming relationship. After a delightful dinner at her condominium, Sophie studied me with a curious intensity, questioning whether I found her appealing. I responded with a smile, assuring her that my attraction to her went beyond just physical aspects. She seemed intrigued by my apparent lack of initiative and playfully inquired if I liked girls. My response conveyed a positive outlook on the situation, affirming that I like her.